Are you interested in the heroin job or not?
Yeah.
Right.
The same.
Right. Now, do you know the gang Cabernet?
The evidence broadcast to the world included detectives selling heroin out of the back of police stations, cops running prostitution rings, and senior detectives trading in child pornography.
Now listen, alright, also, as far as his lawyer is alright, $150, okay? And if I can't do anything,
In 1994, John Hatton, member of the New South Wales Parliament, managed to muster enough votes to initiate a royal commission into corruption within the New South Wales Police Service. The following year, the Wood Royal Commission was formed, headed by Justice James Wood. Over the next 2 years, the commission would uncover a widespread network of police corruption, including drug dealing, prostitution, child pornography, extortion, and the protection of paedophiles from prosecution. The investigation implicated senior police officers, members of the judiciary, politicians, and members of the Catholic clergy. The commission also became known for the 12 suicides and at least one murder that surrounded it. Much of the corrupt activities centred around police operating in the King's Cross area of Sydney. One of these officers, Detective Sergeant Trevor Haken, offered to work with the Royal Commission to uncover police involvement with drug trafficking and dealing. Haken had been acting as the payment manager, receiving money from dealers and distributing it to police officers. The King's Cross investigation led to the exposure of the paedophile extortion and protection racket that was being run by several police officers. The key figure among them was Detective Sergeant Larry Churchill. Churchill had already been found guilty in 1989 of conspiracy to supply amphetamines, but during the Royal Commission, Churchill and his colleagues' involvement with paedophiles was described in detail. If Churchill became aware of evidence of any paedophile activity, he would blackmail the alleged perpetrator for thousands of dollars to kill the cases against them. One of his blackmail operations involved the notorious paedophiles Robert Dolly Dunn and Colin Fisk. In 1987, Dunn had been apprehended in the company of another known paedophile and a young boy. He was taken into custody along with several seized videotapes depicting Dunn having sex with children. Churchill and 2 other detectives, Peter Wells and Richard Hazel, then offered to release Dunn and his associate in exchange for $40,000. Wells escorted the pair to the bank, they paid the money, and were released. In 2002, it was reported that Richard Hazel committed suicide in his home by plunging a knife into his heart. However, the claim of suicide is doubtful given the circumstances. 2 weeks before his death, he confided in friends that he was scared for his life, due to being threatened about giving evidence in a new investigation into paedophilia. Also, the police were unable to find any fingerprints on the knife that had killed him. In 1989, Dunn, Churchill and Fisk were arrested for the manufacture and distribution of amphetamines. Despite the police finding the videos of Dunn engaged in paedophilic acts, he was given an indemnity by the Attorney General, John Dowd, in exchange for providing evidence against the police officers involved. This indemnity was at the request of the investigating officer, Detective Chief Inspector Ken Watson. Consequently, despite his involvement with drug dealing, child abuse and child pornography, Dunn received a sentence of just 3 years. By the time the Wood Royal Commission had convened to review the case, Dunn had already left the country. He wouldn't be apprehended until November 1997, when he was tracked down to a hotel in Honduras. Detective Glenn McNamara was instrumental in exposing the drug distribution and paedophile protection racket that Churchill was running with Dunn and Fisk. McNamara claimed that he began receiving death threats about going after Churchill. He was assigned police protection, but one of the officers allocated to safeguard him gave him a bleak warning. One of 2 things will happen. You will be lured to an isolated location by the bullshit report of a job and then shot, or your locker will be loaded up with heroin and you'll be locked up. Either way, there is no future for you. McNamara pointed the finger at Ken Watson and Lola Scott, who were responsible for organising McNamara's witness protection. During the course of the Wood Royal Commission, a review was conducted of the controversial 1988 Seabeach Kindergarten child abuse case, also known as the Mr. Bubbles case. The officer in charge of the case was Detective Sergeant Ronald Flewitt. Colin Fisk was introduced to Larry Churchill by Ronald Flewitt. In the Seabeach case, the owners of a kindergarten in the Sydney suburb of Mona Vale, Dawn and Anthony Derren, were accused of taking children to a motel across the road from their kindergarten, sexually assaulting them and taking pornographic pictures and videos of them. The Royal Commission's report on Seabeach revealed that the entire investigation was hopelessly compromised from start to finish. Surveillance was insufficient, interviews with the children were conducted by a probationary constable with no experience, interviews were not recorded, children were not interviewed in isolation of each other and their parents, lack of resources, and the investigating officer's lack of expertise in handling a child abuse case. Despite the glaring mistakes in the police's handling of Seabeach, Lola Scott wrote a report to the Minister for Police in 1990 that claimed that there was no evidence that the Seabeach investigation was inadequate, and that any further review of the case by a commission would be a waste of time. The Seabeach case garnered a lot of media attention. In 1990, Channel 9 broadcast an episode of 60 Minutes that detailed the allegations against the Derrens. Attorney General John Dowd had attempted to stop the program being aired. In an interview with Anthony Derren on an episode of the Hinch Current Affairs program, Derren admitted to being arrested in Papua New Guinea for sexually assaulting 2 underage girls. John Bracey, a private investigator hired by the Derrens, accused Detective Flewitt of attempting to extort $30,000 out of the Derrens to make sure the case against them would fail in court. The Royal Commission considered him to be an unreliable witness. Another person hired by the Derrens became an extremely influential figure in the outcome of the trial. Ralph Underwager acted as an expert witness for the defense. He successfully persuaded the court to reject the witness testimony of the children, leading to the collapse of the case against the Derrens. Underwager gained notoriety for an interview he gave with the Dutch paedophile magazine Piedika. In the interview, he said that pedophiles should be more positive and strive for societal acceptance, claiming that pedophilia is an acceptable expression of God's will for love and unity among human beings.
You're a bastard.
No, I'm not.
You're a bastard.
This is Ralph Underwager, psychologist. He was paid $25,000 and gave crucial evidence in favour of Tony Derren. Evidence which helped Derren walk free.
Your people can leave now. You go out the door now.
When we wanted to question Mr. Underwager about his involvement in the Bubbles case, the questions got too harsh.
You go out the door now.
But first, a reminder of the case against Mr. Bubbles.
Jocelyn said that they got undressed and that they got into a bathtub that was full of bubbles and that they played in the bathtub.
Did Mr. Bubbles ever get in the bath himself?
Yes, he did. She said that he got in without any clothes on.
They'd get undressed and get in the bath while he had a shower. He had a shower before he hopped in the bath with them.
Mr. Bubbles?
Yes.
Always the same story. 3- and 4-year-olds being lured into bubble baths with a man who sexually abused them.
Having examined them and talked with them, our unit's convinced that those children were sexually abused.
Absolutely no doubt.
No doubt at all.
That's the evidence Professor Kim Oates wanted to give in court, but he was never asked. As head of the Child Protection Unit at the Camperdown Children's Hospital in Sydney, he's known around the world as an expert in detecting child sexual abuse. So we have 18 children who were examined, 5 of whom your staff say were definitely sexually abused, and all of them from the same preschool. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I think if you look at the incidence of significant child sexual abuse in the community, significant enough to leave physical findings in the preschool age group, I think it's extraordinary.
He was also a founding member of the extremely controversial False Memory Syndrome Foundation. Members of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation are often called upon in high-profile cases to discredit witness testimony, particularly in cases of child abuse. Recently, Elizabeth Loftus of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation testified on behalf of Jeffrey Epstein accomplice Ghislaine Maxwell. Loftus has also been involved with the cases of Harvey Weinstein, Ted Bundy, the Oklahoma City bombing, and the McMartin preschool child abuse case. Some of the children in the Seabeach case were referred to psychiatric counsellors at the Royal Alexandra Hospital for Children. The accounts given by these children included descriptions of occult behaviour and rituals, with one of the kindergarten employees wearing white robes while a child was abused. Another case looked into by the Royal Commission were the allegations of paedophilia levelled against an unnamed high-profile judicial officer by an informant. The investigating officer, Detective Sergeant Brian Rope, had also been involved in the organising of the surveillance operation on the Seabeach Kindergarten. In the initial investigation into the judicial officer, Detective Rope filed a report to his superior, dismissing the validity of the witness's accusations, claiming that there was no evidence of criminal conduct by the judicial officer. During the Wood Royal Commission's review of Rope's investigation, serious flaws emerged. Rope had ignored the evidence provided to him by the informant, failed to check on the validity of details, and even claimed in his report that the informant had refused to give details about the people involved. When the Commission checked into Rope's own notes on the case, they found that the informant had given detailed information that was correct, including the names, occupations, and addresses of those involved. Of particular concern to the Commission was the claim that the investigation file and a record of the Australian Federal Police's interview with the witness had gone missing. The most high-profile suicide that occurred during the Wood Royal Commission was that of Supreme Court Judge Justice David Yeldham. On November 4th, 1996, just hours after being interviewed about allegations of paedophilia by the Royal Commission, Yeldham gassed himself to death in his car. Yeldham had been accused of soliciting sex from underage boys, in accusations going back to the 1960s. Shortly before his death, Yeldham had been named as a paedophile in Parliament by MP Frank Arel. She claimed that she had been shown photographs of Yeldham engaged in sex acts with a young boy. The Commission's examination of Yeldham centred around an incident at Wynyard Railway Station in October 1990. A witness stated that he had been offered money for sex by Yeldham, and later saw Yeldham masturbating in front of a 16-year-old boy. The witness informed the station guards, and 2 police officers arrived a short time later. The officers, referred to by the Commission as CC2 and CC3, questioned Yeldham, who denied the allegation. CC2 told the Commission that while they were with Yeldham, some special branch officers arrived and informed CC2 that they were taking over the investigation. CC2 also stated that the special branch officers had told him what to write in a false report about the incident, removing details about the 16-year-old boy, the offer of money for sex, and writing the whole thing off as one person's word against another's. Yeldham was then led away by Special Branch. CC2 said that he had followed these instructions out of fear of losing his job. He told the Commission that he had transcribed his original notes about what happened at Wynyard Station to a diary, but in November 1996 he had panicked and destroyed the pages containing the notes. The Royal Commission followed up on the Special Branch link by questioning all Special Branch officers that were serving at the time, including the branch commander. Every single one denied having any knowledge of the incident, despite the commander having several entries in his log showing that he and multiple officers had been involved in the matter, including the then acting police commissioner, Colin Cole. Much like David Yeldham, Wollongong Council Alderman Brian Tobin gassed himself to death in his car, shortly after being interviewed by Wood Royal Commission investigators over allegations of child sexual abuse. Likewise, Peter Ferretic committed suicide in the same manner, the day after giving evidence to the Commission about paedophilia. Both Tobin and Ferretic were closely connected to Tony Bevan, the former Lord Mayor of Wollongong. The Commission revealed that Bevan, who had died in 1994, had run a major child prostitution and pornography ring out of Wollongong and Sydney for decades. Bevan had seemingly been immune to any kind of police scrutiny when he was alive. In 1979, he had been questioned by police while at the notorious Costello's nightclub in King's Cross. Despite being with a 13-year-old boy at the time, no action was taken. Throughout the 1980s, over half a dozen young boys had come to the police and accused Bevan of sexually assaulting them, but nothing was done. By 1991, the sheer amount of accusations and information relating to Bevan and his accomplices had caused Detective Sergeant King of the Police Tactical Intelligence Section to submit a report to Task Force DISC, a group set up to investigate child sexual and ritual abuse in New South Wales church institutions. In his report, King stated that there was strong evidence pointing to an organised paedophile ring operating from Wollongong, and urged that action should be taken against Bevan and the other members of the group. Again, no action was taken. Bevan's operation, as described by the Royal Commission's report, was an extensive and highly organised one. He plied boys with drugs, blackmailed them into sex, made and sold pornographic films of them, distributed child pornography he received from contacts in the US, and hosted parties at his Wollongong penthouse, where the boys were pimped out for $80 at a time. Bevan even communicated with members of the ring by sending coded messages via telex machine. The Costello's nightclub, frequented by Bevan, was well known as a hub of child prostitution. Despite boys as young as 12 being offered there, it only attracted police attention for issues with the club's liquor license. The Commission found that the police would even phone the club in advance if a raid was being planned. In a more recent investigation into child abuse at the Durrook Boys' Home in South Windsor, New South Wales, some of the victims claimed that they were driven to King's Cross by staff members of the home, where they were prostituted at Costello's. The Durrook scandal also implicated the Member of Parliament Alistair Webster, who was the superintendent of the school for a decade. Webster faced 14 charges, including indecent assault.
Last week, Ross Coulthart exposed the appalling mistreatment that went on unchecked at Durrook for decades. It resulted in destroyed lives for men like Carl Orme, Gordon Parsons and Daryl Stanton. They allege they were repeatedly physically and sexually assaulted as young boys.
To this day I still have nightmares, because it happened on a daily basis. They were just bastards, you know. We were caged children at the mercy of a major, serious pedophile ring.
From the late 70s, Costello's and another King's Cross club, the Venus Room, were both known to be heavily involved in police corruption, drugs and child prostitution. The Venus Room was owned by one of Australia's most notorious organised crime figures, Abe Saffron. Saffron was involved in the corruption of New South Wales Police Commissioner Norman Allen, High Court Justice Lionel Murphy, Assistant Commissioner Jim Pine, and New South Wales Premier Robert Askin. Several people close to Saffron, including his own son, stated that Saffron arranged prostitutes for senior law enforcement officials and made weekly payments of thousands of dollars to them.
Saffron is organising sex parties for close friends, politicians and crooked cops.
If you want a party, we can give you a party.
Yeah, a bit of S&M, you know, it goes a long way with something.
That feature prostitutes, showgirls and homosexuals. One of the most notorious gatherings occurs at Palm Beach on Sydney's northern peninsula.
Yourself at home. Thanks, Abe.
By the mid-70s, Abe Saffron has built up a group of powerful allies in business, politics, entertainment and corrupt police.
You have a good time now.
One of his tools for gaining favours is blackmail. From the early days, he has two-way mirrors and peepholes installed in some of his clubs to take photos of those involved in sex acts.
The girls were in there serving them drinks, and there was nice lounges and everything, and of course his friends would go in there and other friends would look through the peepholes. They were compromised, so I think he blackmailed them.
In 1983, an inquest was held into the disappearance of publisher Juanita Nilsson, who Saffron was suspected of having kidnapped and murdered. During the inquest, he was accused of arranging a $50,000 loan from the intelligence-controlled Nugan Hand Bank. Saffron was also a close friend of senior ASIO officer Dudley Doherty. The most dramatic event surrounding the Wood Royal Commission was the murder of former Wollongong Mayor Frank Arel. Arkell was being investigated by the Commission and facing 29 charges of child sexual abuse. In June 1998, Arkell's mutilated body was found in his home. Initially, the police investigation suspected a serial killer was targeting the members of a pedophile ring, due to the murder of another Wollongong man, David O'Hearn, just 2 weeks prior. O'Hearn had also been severely mutilated, prompting police to suspect that it had been the work of a satanic cult. Later that year, 19-year-old Mark Valera walked into a Wollongong police station and nonchalantly confessed to the murders.
It was a scene that I'd never encountered in all my years in the police. There was a body of a male laying on his back. He'd been decapitated. There was a hand sitting on a lounge, and it appeared that he'd been completely disemboweled, and the intestines and that were laying on a silver tray that was alongside the body.
On one of the walls there was a pentagram with the word Satan beside it. Another wall had an inverted cross. And on a mirror above a side table, the word Satan had been written also.
All these drawings appeared to have been drawn in the victim's blood.
I suppose in your own words, can you tell me what information you have about the death of Mr. O'Hearn?
I don't know anything much about David himself, but I murdered him. I had in my mind that I wanted to kill someone that day. I went to David O'Hearn's house at about 6 o'clock at night, and I walked into his house.
I'll just get Detective Casser just to stand there, and if you can take the place of David O'Hearn for the purposes of this exercise, if I can just get you to stand up, please. And if you can indicate, if Detective Casser is walking away that way, if you can just indicate what you did with him.
Yep. And walk, and bang, hit him on the head, and he slumped down there.
The Royal Commission also looked into incidents of paedophilia within the church and the police handling of them. They focused on the cases of Father Peter Comensoli and Brother Michael Evans, both having long histories of child abuse allegations. Evans was the former principal of the Christian Brothers College, now known as Edmund Rice College in Wollongong. Peter Comensoli, Tony Bevan, Frank Arkell, and Brian Tobin all attended this college. Michael Evans committed suicide in 1994 by gassing himself in his car. In 1994, Colin Fisk made a statutory declaration that in 1989 he had been interviewed by the New South Wales Police Internal Security Unit, or IPSU. Fisk claims that during that interview he outlined the existence of a paedophile ring and its members, including Frank Arkell and high-profile solicitor John Marsden. Fisk also accused Detective Sergeant Ronald Flewitt of being a key figure in the protection racket. Fisk stated that he supplied photographs to the IPSU to support his allegations, but became frustrated when they failed to look into any of the people he named. He subsequently made several requests to the IPSU for copies of his interviews and documents, but he was informed that they had been destroyed or misplaced. He was told this by IPSU officer Detective Chief Inspector Ken Watson.